Somebody's sleepy. Somebody stayed up late. Everybody, how you doing? Hey, sweetheart, how you doing? Good, how are you? I'm good. Every day, that's all it takes. Hey, how are you? Doing well.
All right, good to see everyone this morning. Sure we'll have others coming in, maybe someone may be dropping off their soup next door. We're going to continue our study. We're in the book of Job. We're going to finish Job up this morning. We're going to be in Job chapter 3. It's actually chapter 3 through Job chapter 42. So as I stated that the other day, it's a lot to cover, but we'll get through it as we look to this. So let's go and jump into our questions real quick. Let's see, come on, start working. All right, so we go back to all the way back to Matthew 1. What and why did the angel instruct Joseph to name the son to be born to Mary? So what was the name, first of all? The son to be born to Mary. Matthew 1:21.
Call his name Jesus.
Jesus, and why was he to be, what did they say basically about it? Why did the angel instruct us?
Save the people.
That's right, because it would be Savior of the world, save the people of their sins, is what it does in that verse exactly, which brings us to Luke 2:4. Why did Joseph and Mary have to leave their home and go to Bethlehem in Judea when Jesus was born? What was the reason for them even being in Bethlehem? The census, exact taxes. It was a census is what it was, so they could all pay their taxes. They had to go back to their home territory to see that and everything through that. All right, so let's go to the next one. We see nothing running by with a bunch of graham crackers. All right, so Genesis 44:1-2. What was put in Benjamin's sack besides grain? What's that? Remember? There's some Joseph's cup. Joseph's cup, exactly right. All right, next one. Noah, Genesis 8, after the flood. After the flood, what was God's promise concerning his destroying all life ever again? He would never do it again. And concerning seasons and days, they would what? They would continue forever, exactly. They would continue the spring, summer, fall, and winter would continue forever. Now, the next one. What was God's command to Noah concerning one person killing another person?
Whoever sheds blood, a man's blood, by that man his blood shall be shed.
Exactly. So it's life for a life is what we find there exactly in those areas. Yes or no? After the flood, did God want many people on the earth again? Yes, because he said to repopulate it now, continue to do so. Genesis 9:7, which now brings us to, too far. When God asked Satan, from where did you come? What was Satan's answer?
Going to and fro.
Going to and fro among the, basically upon the earth, all throughout in the way he was saying it. Hadn't changed any, of course, from that. Name the way Satan harmed Job to tempt him to do evil. How did he harm him? Some of the things that he did. Remember, this is in chapter 1. It's not chapter 2 yet, where it boils and everything.
Took everything away from him.
Took everything away from him, killed all his children. And we say take everything, all his livestock, houses, and also servants. And so we see all that happening. It's exactly right. It was just a terrible thing with all that to be gone. Which now brings us to the last one. Name Job's 3 friends who came to show sympathy. Exactly, that's exactly right. All right, so Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Next one, Job's friends were so saddened by his terrible illness that they sat without speaking. How long?
7 days.
7 days, exactly right. They were pure quiet for 7 days. Which now brings us into the book of Job. We'll go back to it. What we're going to talk this morning will be about Job's friends as they visit him. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the different things, basically the conversations that go back and forth with him. But to do that, before we get to that, kind of give we talked a little bit about the beginning, I give a lot of introduction to Job, but I wanted to save that for today. It'd be a lot easier because it'll explain a lot of 3 through 42. So, in several senses, the book of Job is probably one of the most difficult in the Bible, really, when it comes down to it. First, because it contains some mysterious, puzzling, you would say, and difficult, things to understand. That really, when it comes down to it, the only way to give the answer to it would be this one out of Deuteronomy 29, 29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. And there are things that, that God doesn't need us to know. There's no reason for it. But the things that we do need to know to make sure that we're with Him in the end is very clear throughout the Bible. We see that. And secondly, because God made it clear that at the end of the book of Job said some things in his speeches that were incorrect. Not that God was incorrect, but that Job was incorrect. And things that were happening. And it's kind of like Pharaoh's words to Moses. They were just his own words. And so also the same thing we see here in Job is that the words of the three friends were their own. Not even all Job's words were right. And what I mean by that is, Job is without a doubt an inspired book. But what we understand, it's not inspired words. Meaning God didn't tell them to say those things, those bad things that are there. But reminded the writer of everything that was done, everything that was said when they wrote the book. And that's where we get into the inspiration of it, and what we find and understand. So, when you see a book with wrong answers, realize that's not God saying that to tell them to say that. We're just reading the history of what took place, and the inspiration would be God for the one that's writing it. I'm going to kind of think about that as Job 38, we'll look at verses 1 and 2. Someone go and read that for us, please.
And the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this who guards counsel by words without knowledge?
Thank you. So he's making it very clear. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what's going on. You don't realize how you sound, in other words, to God. There's a couple other verses about this. Job 40, 1 through 8. Someone go and read that for us, please. It's 2 slides.
Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified?
So what God goes through this is basically saying, look, there's things that you don't have a clue about, and he's just having to remind Job about that. Not that Job was being, being in a way, basically not honorable to God or anything like that. That's not what that is. And we see this in the same thing with Joseph's friends. And then finally, the last one, 42, 1 through 6, and I'll get your question to ask. Someone go ahead and read this, 42, 1 through 6, please.
Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You ask, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I offer myself and repent in death and ashes.
Thank you. So here it's very clear, as we find this here, that Job realizes, he immediately says it, I'm wrong, I'm completely wrong. And that was the difference between Job and his friends, as we see here. We're going to see a little bit. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, even today, sometimes when things go wrong, we don't do it in a disrespectful way, but we say, God, why?
Yeah. Yep.
Why me? Why is this happening? What is happening to our, let's say to our country or to us as individuals or family? We'll do that, but we still respect, the majority of us still respect God, even in that sense.
Yeah, it's not that we're questioning God to tell him he's wrong. We just want an answer. I mean, it's what kind of comes out of it. And sometimes we get the answer, and sometimes what? We don't, and it won't happen, and we see that. So as we see all this happening, at the end of that verse there where Job says, he abhors himself. Of course, that word often used throughout the scripture means that he was disgusted with himself. I mean, that's how far he went when he says that word abhor. He disgusted himself in what he did, knowing that he should have never been questioning God in certain things, even though, as was said, that's kind of just the human thing of us, the human side that we see. And so from this, we're basically forced to conclude that there are some things in Job's words that are not taken as inspired scripture, once again, the way I stated it. But Job's words, for the most part, are right compared to the words of his three friends. In fact, we read this in Job, let me see where I'm at, Job 42, verse 8. If someone go and read that for us, please.
Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servants Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job had.
Think about this. Well, we're gonna, in a minute, we're going to be reading what his friends had said and what they were about. And God makes it very clear, very quick. You know, you think Job is the one that has problems here spiritually and difficult? It's you. And in fact, it's not even enough for you to go ahead and sacrifice these things to me right here. Job has to do it for you. And so God makes it very clear to them towards the end of what we get to, that last chapter there. So God strongly condemns the words of these three friends, and as he goes through, while the rest of the Bible, is revealed to be all inspired scripture. And of course, the book of Job records exactly what they said, inspiration, but it's clear that the inaccuracies are left in his words. So once again, God inspired the writer to tell exactly what was happening. And this requires us, to always be careful. It's kind of like the words of the Pharisees to Jesus. It wasn't that God told those Pharisees to say it, but he recorded what they said. And that's what we have. So as we look to this, we have many different uninspired words throughout the Bible. Those who were doing wrong, not doing right by God, and then those, of course, that would come out later with it. We also have many instances of sins of, let me see, no, I don't want to say that. So basically, when we look at this at the end of, we get to this verse, at this whole area here, we see there's a man by Elihu, spoke, and then God addressed Job's words of Job as he repents for it. And you're going to notice as we read some of these, it sounds a lot like poetry in what you're reading, and it is. That's why it's in the poetry section when you look at Job, and it has to do with the way the Hebrew poetry, the way they would write things, the way they would say things, and the way it moves. So as we look to this, we understand. We ask the question, when did Job live, and when, who wrote the book? When it comes down to it, we can only use deduction to basically answer this question. We kind of look at things external and eternal, and it's kind of difficult because there's no other book like Job, what we find here. Job had how many children did he have at this point? He has none now. How many did he have before that? He had 10, right? He had 10. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And, this would put him at least in his 50s. We would say at least, for sure, at least in his 50s. And yet after his affliction, he lived another 140 years. So it means that Job lived 190 years old, which would place him somewhere, as I stated before, around the time of Abraham. That's really when we see Job, around Abraham's time. For by the time of Moses, man's total lifespan at that point was what? Anybody remember by the time of Moses, what were people only living to and not past it? About 120 years is what we find, that we see that. So also he did something else that you don't see under the Mosaic law. What did he do spiritually that only he did in his family and acted as? He offered sacrifices being a priest. So he was a priest to God. That's what you see in the patriarchal time of this happening. Of course, the law of Sinai wouldn't have been given yet. So it's easy to conclude pretty much that he lived during the patriarchal age. It's hard sometimes for people to see that because of where it's located in the Bible. That's all it is, where it's located in there. But it's located in that part because of the poetry, as you would find. So also when we look at this, who wrote the book? Who really wrote the book? That is unanswered. We don't know. Some would say, oh, it's Job. We don't know that for sure. But the thoughts are, of course, Job himself, Elihu. Some believe Moses wrote it, and some believe Solomon wrote it. Just all these different thoughts, or a Jewish scribe have all been put forth. But when we really look to it, the way you usually find out who wrote a book is because you look at the internal and external evidence, and there's none to show us that here. We just don't see it. So the book had a very important place, though, in the hearts of Israel, and I want you to understand this, because some have said, oh, Job wasn't real. Job wasn't what didn't really happen. This really was a man that all this took place. It speaks, about 2 dinosaurs that are in there. And they're like, oh, no, none of those things happened. It's just not there. But what's interesting is for someone to say that is I said, what do you believe in James? Do you believe James wrote what he wrote in the book of the Bible was right? Oh, yeah, of course I believe what James wrote. What about Jesus? You believe what Jesus said in the Bible? Oh yeah, well what about Ezekiel maybe? Yeah, I'm sure Ezekiel and Jeremiah are right. Well, guess who talks about Job? Those people. In fact, James chapter 5, let's go and look what he says here in James chapter 5, verse 11, just to prove that this truly was a man. If someone go and read that for us, please.
Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job, and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful.
So he uses Job as that example of how he's persevered throughout all this time of everything that went on with him. And then in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 14, 19 through 20, the reason this is important because this is the Lord speaking. He's talking here, and he's going to mention Job. Someone with Jeremiah, someone go and read that for us, please.
Or if I send a pestilence into the land and pour out my fury on it in blood, and cut off from it man and beast, even though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, says the Lord God. They would deliver neither son nor daughter. They would deliver only themselves by their righteousness.
Thank you. So as we see this here, it's pretty big for Job to be mentioned with Noah and Daniel. Because when we think of Noah and Daniel, we think of very righteous men. Righteous people in the Bible. And that's why God brings that part out about being righteous. We see so was Job. So in spite of the difficulties that must be overcome, to gain a true understanding of this book, it is worth the effort without a doubt, because we know that it is a book rich with truths from every trial basically you go through, every type of suffering, issuing that's there that people must face. So now to get back to where we were last week. Last week we left off with Job's friends, making fun of him, basically, not just making fun of him. They sat for 7 days, but then they started questioning him, what he was doing, what he had basically, not much what he's doing, but as much, what did you do wrong? And we see that's not the case. So after the speech, Job begins to basically regain his composure. And after those 7 days, and after the foolishness of his friends speaking and so on, he's going to start to speak. He is actually going to start to answer their questions of what they're saying about him, what they're talking. So let's jump into that as he begins to rein his own feelings toward the matter of regaining control once again of himself. We begin by looking at Job 12, which we're going to start at. Job 12, 2 through 4. If someone going to read that for us, please.
No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Indeed, who does not know such things as these? I am one mocked by his friends who call on God, and he answered him. The just and blameless God is ridiculed.
So as we see this here, appreciate we see this happening here. This is Job showing his feelings, and really getting back to where he needs to get to answer these things and to prove to them that he's not the one. Even though we're going to go through all this to the very end, and they're still going to believe that Job had done something wrong. And then finally, we read a moment ago, Job 42, God is going to tell them, you made a mistake. You guys were wrong. None of this was Job. And we're going to see God, of course, bless him there at the end. But also notice these verses. Job 13, 8 through 10. If someone read that for us, please. And verse 12.
Will you show partiality for him? Will you contend for God? Will it be well when he searches you out? Or can you mock him as one mocked a man? He will surely rebuke you if you secretly show partiality. You, you, can't say the word, hurt. For birds of ashes, your defense or defenses of clay.
Thank you. So the reason I wanted to do the 42 one first to show you that God agrees with Job here. Job's telling them that they're not going to trust me. And, imagine these men. Imagine Eliphaz and them thinking that, what do you mean it's us? And it's because of the way you're treating me, the way things are happening. They would have done better off just doing what they did the first 7 days and doing what? Just keeping their mouth shut, not saying a word. But the book wouldn't be able to do for us what it does. What's found in there if that didn't happen, of course. So Eliphaz, we find him does not listen to Job's warning, but he, instead of listening to what he has to say, he decides he's going to continue to rebuke Job. He's going to charge him with all these things that makes no sense whatsoever. So let's go ahead and read this to see where we're moving at. Job 15, 2 through 6, please.
Should a wise man answer with empty knowledge and fill himself with the east wind? Should he reason with unprofitable talk, or by speeches with which he can do no good? Yes, you cast off fear and restrain prayer before God, for your iniquity teaches your mouth, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, and not I. Yes, your own lips testify against you.
So this is Eliphaz talking to Joseph, talking to Job, and then going back and forth, which brings us now a little further down. Go ahead and read this one too, verse 12 to 14.
Okay. Why does your heart carry you away, and what do your eyes wink at? That you turn your spirit against God, and let such words go out of your mouth. What is man that he could be pure, and he who is born of a woman that he could be righteous?
Thank you. So now this is Job coming back to what Eliphaz was saying in Job 12, of what we see here. And then after all this, so here we have, after Eliphaz's speech, we see Job beginning to calm down. Once he settles in, he realizes these men were so-called friends, having nothing to offer him at all. I mean, you ever had friends like that, or people, there's nothing they say is being good to you, it's offering you something. And so we see this happening with it, that their fangs, in a sense, kind of been removed from Job, you would say, and he simply speaks with them now. He's just going to go back and forth in discussions and the poetry you're going to hear there. And he still makes some statements concerning God that were words without knowledge. Of course, Job doing that. But gone are the strong accusations. They're not there anymore. And we're going to listen to these words of Job as he tells the suffering and how he would treat his friends if he were in their place. This is very important here in this part, because we're going to see how someone should actually act. And that's what he's going to do. He goes, if I was in your shoes, or if you were in my shoes, this is what I would say to you. These would be the words. So let's go ahead and see. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of see some of what's found inside Job, of how he is and the type of man he is. So let's go and continue to read Job 16, 1 through 6, please.
Then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things, miserable comforters are you all.
I'll stop you there. Can you imagine everybody there go, you are the worst comforters in the world. You you imagine someone telling you that. And as soon as you hear that, you got to be like, it's like, and they got to be thinking, yeah, he's right. Look at how we're being. Chapter, you want to continue to read, please.
Shall words of wind have an end, or words provoke you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If your soul were in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you.
Well, we'll continue there in just a second. I think it's really great how, what Job does here. And, he doesn't say, he's not just talking about physical body, because he knows how he says, my soul. This isn't just hitting me physically. This is hitting me spiritually, what you're trying to say. And I want you to think mentally what Job's going through. The mental side of things is very big and huge, and he's dealing with all this. So he's trying to explain this to him, which we continue to read, Brother Chad. Do that, please.
But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. Though I speak, my grief is not relieved, and if I remain silent, how am I eased? So
he's showing how it is to be done, how it should be done. And this is why we see and understand why God has such respect for Job and what he found in him. Dad, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as we live today, a great lesson for us is when we're trying to comfort somebody, to be careful of what we say. And if we don't know what to say, it's better just to be silent and give a hug.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, Job, notice what he said. A minute ago he talked about the east wind. Now he just talked about the wind blowing again. In other words, he's saying what you're saying is like hot air. It's just nothing coming from what you're saying that means any good at all. And it's not, and Job's not, saying basically like, yeah, you can say those things if I did something wrong. He's like, I'm innocent of everything you're accusing me of. Which brings us now a little further. We see a little bit more about Job. Job 16, I'll read this, 12 through 22. And he says, I was at ease, but he has shattered me. He also has taken me by my neck, and shaken me to pieces. He has set me up for his target. His archers surrounded me. He pierces my heart and does not pity. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with wound upon wound. He runs at me like a warrior. I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in the dust. My face is flushed from weeping, and on my eyelids is the shadow of death. Although no violence is in my hands, and my prayer is pure. O earth, do not cover my blood, and let me cry. Have no resting place. And then he says, surely, even now my witness is in heaven, and my evidence is on high. My friends scorn me. My eyes pour out tears to God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God, as a man pleads for his neighbor. For when a few years are finished, I shall go the way of no return. You know, in this we find Job, once again, we hear this, we see the sadness, how bad it really is. And we don't see him taking away from God. He's still looking at God. In fact, he says, God is my what? It says about in heaven. God's his witness, you know, of what's going on and what's taking place here with his life. And so we see all that. So we get to Job 17 as he continues to talk. If someone go and read this for us, 6 through 7, please.
But he has made me a byword of the people, and I have become one in whose face men speak. My eyes has also grown dim because of sorrow, and all my members are like shadows.
Thank you. Before we go to the next block, let me see here, real quick. I'll have you read verse 11 also.
My days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart.
Thank you. So as we see this here, you know, everything that he's dealing with and what's happening, you know, Job is trying to say, you know, this isn't, because sometimes it seems like, wow, how did Job do that? He did a pretty good job, but not, it's very difficult for him. Very difficult, just like it would be for you and I. The difference when we see here with Job is, Job doesn't take his difficulty and expect his friends to fix it. He doesn't expect himself to fix it. He expects all of his difficulty to give it to who? He gives it to God, and that's what he wants to do. So Job now begins to speak this emotional charges that he has, the damage that has come to him, and change his attitude to people. Suffering, you know, we do not often associate, we said, with his physical anguish. It's mostly all mental, as we find here. In fact, we're going to go to Bildad now. Bildad, his other supposed friend, speech continues. Guess what? On what thing? Do you think he says, "You're right, Job. Let us pray to God for you. Let's do everything we can to help God help you in this moment." Is that what we're probably going to hear?
Nope.
We're going to hear the same thing. It's the same thing, same thought. You know, he insults Job's. Now he's going to go further. He's going to start insulting Job's intelligence and his spirituality. He's like, Job, you don't have a clue what you're saying. Don't you realize how bad you are? And then goes once again to affirm that all the suffering you're going through is because you become a wicked man. Now, here's what's important. Has anybody, what we read about, what we hear about Job, it sounds like there was nothing wicked he's done. He just doesn't seem like a wicked man at all. And remember, he's not only dealing with his friends right now, he would be dealing with the whole people of the East. Because remember, said he's the richest man in the East. You think everybody probably heard, you know, the word got around what happened to Job? Without a doubt. And so now you probably got all these other people thinking the same thing, especially if they talk to these friends of his. I mean, imagine what they're saying about him. So Job's answer continues to rebuke them for cruelty, for what they're being. And that's what we're going to find in chapter 19 as we look at it. Come on, turn for me. There we go. Chapter 19, verses 2 through 6. If someone go and read that for us, please.
How long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have reproached me, and you are not ashamed that you have warned me. It is indeed I have heard my error and remains with me. It indeed will exalt yourself against me and plead my grace against me. Know that the God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. Thank you.
Now there's a couple things here real quick. You know, once again, he says, you know, you don't understand your words. Words do what?
They cut.
They can cut. Words are hurt. You know, words can hurt depending on if they're not being used right. And he says, you know, you should be ashamed of what you're saying to me, of how bad this is. And then he gets to the point, verse 6, someone will say, oh, he's accusing God now. It's not what he's doing. He says, know then that God has wronged me. What it means is, if he's telling his friends, you think that I'm getting this done to me because of sin, because of something I've done, then God has wronged me in that sense because I haven't. And he's just wanting them to understand that he's done nothing wrong, which brings us to 13 through 22. I'll read these two also because of time. And it says, he has removed my brothers far from me, and my acquaintances are completely estranged from me. So what's Job saying here? He's saying everybody is doing what? Just falling away from him, leave him alone. And what happens in the Mideast, we got to understand back in those days, people start thinking that if someone is having all this done to them, and you start mingling with them, you know, on a regular, you know, as a friend, that more likely what's going to happen to you? You're going to get caught up in it. It's going to be the same thing, exactly. And a moment ago, I didn't show you the verses right before this. Notice what Job said. They had left him and come back to him 10 different times. 10 times. Telling him how bad he is and how terrible. So he continues to talk here, and he says in verse, I didn't read all this, did I? Nope, my relatives have failed, and my close friends have forgotten me. He's talking to them. You're supposed to be my closest friends. You've forgotten who I am. And then he says, those who dwell in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger. So we do know that he still has some servants. You know, not all of them died. And it says, but he gives no answer. I beg him with my mouth. And then he goes on to, which I read a stranger. I'm an alien in their sight. I call my servant, but he gives me no answer. I beg with him in my mouth. My breath is offensive to my wife, and I am repulsed to the children of my own body. In other words, saying basically that everything that went on happened to them, people were saying it was because of me. And then verse 18, even young children despise me. I arise. Now remember this. We go, why would people start despising him? What does Job look like right now?
With all the boils.
Exactly. All the boils, everything about him, we said more like the way it sounds, it's leprosy that he's dealing with. And, you know, and with leprosy comes the big mental part. You know, back in the days of Israel, if you had leprosy, I've said this before, you had to cover yourself completely. And if you were going to walk through the streets, you had to do what? I'm unclean. You had to announce yourself that this is what you are. And this is what he's getting at. And he says, all my close friends abhor me. In other words, remember that word we said, you know, they're disgusted with him, is what he's saying. He says, and those whom I love have turned against me. My bone clings to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. I have pity on me. Have pity on me. O you, my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you persecute me as God does and are not satisfied with my flesh? So with all this happening, you know, Job really feels like everybody has deserted him. He doesn't believe God has deserted him, but he believes God, you know, something's happening here because God is in control of everything, right? And in a sense, he's right because he doesn't know what the background showed about Satan coming after him and God allowing that. And that's what we would see here in these verses. So with all this happening, here we go with another one, Zophar. So now here comes Zophar. You know, his speech contains no direct insults of Job. He doesn't insult him directly, which is great. We say, okay, it's a little different. But he continues the thought that he must have done something wrong. Doesn't insult him, say you're not intelligent or something wrong, but he still says you had to have done something. You need to search yourself closer of what is here. And Job fights back by showing how completely false their reasoning is. He's like, you don't understand, that's not the case. When have you known me to do anything like that? And so their thoughts that Job must have done something wrong is based upon the false premises that once again they believe God is punishing him for everything that's happened here. And Job proves conclusively that all the words against him have been evil and wicked, and since the premise is false, and in the midst of his reasoning and proving, he accuses them of preaching and teaching error, not only to him, but to others also. And this is where it gets really bad. So let's go ahead and read this, Job 21, verse 2 and 3, because we look at this and we go, 42 verses, that's a lot. I mean, 42 chapters, that's a lot of chapters for something like this. It's because we want to see here how bad it got, but also at the same time, when one stands faithful to God, how God will reward him and take care of him. And so someone want to read this, please.
Listen carefully to my speech, and let this be your consolation. Bear with me that I may speak, and after I have spoken, keep mocking. Look, I know your thoughts and the schemes with which you would wrong me. How then can you comfort me with empty words, since falsehood remains in your answers? So
thank you. So he's just bringing all this up. So Eliphaz comes back, and he's going to give a final speech to Job here. And it's this one isn't like, this is what you've done wrong. This speech here is a very deeply insulting speech. I mean, very insulting to Job. He accuses him of terrible, wicked things that only an evil person would be involved in, and that no one could even know if Job actually did these things without reading his mind. There is only one person, or one, we say, well, one, Jesus. You put God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit together. They are the only ones that can tell what's in our mind. The only one. Because many times we have said Jesus read the hearts of men, of human beings, and we see that. So as we look through this here, we find this last part. We see Job 22, 4 through 7. If someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
Is it because of your fear of him that he corrects you and enters into judgment with you. Is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? For you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason, and stripped the naked of their clothes. You have not given the weary water to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry.
I want y'all to hear that. This is what Eliphaz is accusing Job of. Because, you know, usually when someone's well off, doing well, a lot of times they just keep to themselves and their family. You know, they don't want to help others out there with it. And we see, so they're saying this, that Job doesn't help people that are hungry. He doesn't get people that are thirsty. He's got all these terrible thoughts in his mind. I mean, it's just terrible. They have no proof. He has no proof whatsoever that this is the case. Which brings us to these next verses. Someone read 22, 9 through 10, please.
You have sent widows away empty, and the strength of the fatherless was cursed. Therefore snares are all around you, and sudden fear troubles you.
I'm going to stop right just a second. Chad, I'll have you read the others too in just a second. So once again, this is what Eliphaz is saying about Job. I mean, this is really bad stuff when you think about it. And Chad, keep going and continue reading for us, please.
Now acquaint yourself with him, and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive, please, instruction from his mouth, and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. You will remove iniquity far from your tents.
So here he's straight out saying, you've done everything against God. Just bring God back into your life. Has Job ever not had God in his life? Not that we read about it. It sounds like he's always been there, which brings us to the last part. I mean, the part here, 23, and we'll have, that verse 27? I missed it. Oh, well, that's all right. So before I say it, before we go into this next one, we know that none of these things Eliphaz states are true. None of them, rather. None of them are true. They're wicked imaginations in his own heart, in his own thought. And it's terrible to think he could even think about these things. But they heard Job reminding him of the prayers he has uttered in vain. And what we find here is that he begins his defense, agonizing attempts to reach God. So now Job isn't going to, he's done with his friends kind of, now he's just getting to God, going to God, going to God. Come on, help me with this, get me through this. And he's been doing that, but he's going to defend himself in a sense. Dad, go ahead.
Jumping to today, sometimes we jump to conclusions about something before we know even what is going on.
Yeah.
You know, the old story is, you know, my car's in front of the liquor store down here. Oh, he must be getting something to drink. No, he could be in there with someone who's called him and said, hey, look, I need your help, or whatever. You know, but we jump to conclusions sometimes, and that's exactly what these three friends, they've already made up their mind.
Yeah.
Job's guilty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they immediately, you know, that's what they are. And it wasn't that they were just guilty a little, they just kept going and going and going. And you know, you wonder, where did they come up with all these things? It's probably they've seen in the past with other people, what they've dealt with. And so that's what we find here. So let's go ahead and read this, 23, 2 through 5. Someone read that for us, please.
Even today my flank is bitter, my hand is listening because of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with argument. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me.
And then verse 8 also, let me see, what's wrong with this thing? There we go.
Look, I go forward, but it is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him.
So here what we find is, you know, Job is starting to, he's not questioning his faith, he's not questioning God, but he's kind of coming to the point out, where are you? You know, and what's going on? And there's nothing wrong with that, because does God ever say that Job sinned in what he did? No, he said he never did. So we see that you know, God knows the human side of us. And always remember, all Satan wants him to do is have full doubt in God, accuse God of doing, you know, being horrible, terrible, everything about him. And Job hasn't done this. Dad, you have a comment?
No, who knows? There's nothing that tells us this that I can recall. But maybe Satan, you know, Satan was allowed to do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he kind of whispered in the ears of his three friends. And they, you know, just turned around and they did this to try to push Job even further down.
And that's true, exactly. And God, you know, remember, because God gave Satan, said, go ahead, you know, choose you on you. Just can't hurt, you can't kill. You know, at first you couldn't put a hand on Job. Then in chapter 2, he allowed him to do that. You just can't kill him. And so with all this being said, we have the final speech with Bildad, and of course it contains nothing new. Little has anything to use for help. his 3 friends who came to comfort Job. Remember that when they got their first group, they were silent for 7 days, they said, and they told him, we're here to comfort you. Okay, if this is comfort, I don't want it. You know, and they've either convinced or convicted in this whole thing. They're trying to convince Job. You got to look deep inside. You've done something wrong. You've had to. And they haven't convinced him of it because he knows. He knows where he's at. So his final words describe his righteousness and a few more of the things he has suffered. And I'm out of time, so I'll read these real quick. It says, how have you helped him who is without power? How have you saved the arm that has no strength? How have you counseled one who has no wisdom? And how have you declared sound advice to many? Oh, that I were in months past as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with him, when my children were around me, and when my steps were bathed with cream. And he says, and the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. He's talking about those times when it was good. And then he continues to go on here with each one of these. And what we find is that we learn as we go through this that Elihu, his speech seems to be filled with both wisdom and caution. And then finally in chapter 42, God comes to tell all of them, he says, look, you are the ones that are wrong. Job, he did nothing wrong. It's not you. And then in verse 11 of chapter 42, we see God shows the blessings that he gives back to Job. We see all of his livestock that he had basically doubled over what he had before. And children again having them. And it's just remarkable what God does for him. And that's what we see. So there's 3 through 42 in a snap real quick there, all that we have. But hopefully you see this is what the book is about, going back and forth. And a man or a human being trying to withstand all this. And he does it. And he makes it. And he does well through it. And we'll leave it there. Any comments before we close? Nobody? All right, we'll go ahead in there. Thank you.